for.
Sort of taking that to heart in a lot of ways, working very hard to break ground, to integrate knowledges among traditional practices and ways of knowing, and sort of the Western way of doing things, which we all know has its challenges. So a big part of it is integrating knowledges, and as you can imagine, that's sort of a discipline and a challenge in and of itself. But we're also ultimately working here to try and move the so-called conservation needle, to try and evaluate and understand how our investments, it's all of these knowledges that we've talked about, the time that we've put into this, and the money, whether that's through grants or other ways, and your own personal blood, sweat, and tears. How do we keep the crown of the continent functioning and looking and working the way that it has, and to sustain human populations through the millennia? We all know there's a lot of new stresses and challenges associated with managing the crown. But the landscape conservation design is intended to bring all of the great knowledges, everything that you're bringing today and have brought beforehand, and will bring in the future, wherever those knowledges come from. And hopefully they're grounded in traditional ways of knowing and wise stewardship practices. And we're going to bring them all together, and the landscape conservation design is essentially intended to build a roadmap that we can all look at, and we can all use as sort of a guide to work together, to act in ways that sustain those wonderful things we love about the crown. Okay, with that, I'll pause here and I'll check in with Mike Durglow and Catherine McDonald, and see how your reception is.
We're good up here up in the north. I see Katie just logged on, so I think we're good to go, Sean.
Are you guys able to hear us?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes,
okay.
Lima Charlie.
Okay. I guess I'll just jump in here and switch over to a PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully I'll be able to do that without losing everyone. And Mike will leave ample space for you and your folks to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about what you guys accomplished last Monday. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Is that looking okay for folks? Yeah, okay, good.
Looks good.
Okay, super. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Evan, if you were here last week, again, thank you for coming back. If you weren't here last week, don't worry too much. We're going to catch you right up to speed, and we're going to start working with your best knowledges and the information that you can share with us. What am I welcoming you to? Well, this is a virtual workshop on riparian, aquatic, and wetland ecosystems across the crown of the continent. It's part of this effort we call the landscape conservation design. This virtual workshop has 3 sessions. This is the second one. We will be meeting again tomorrow. I'm sorry, not tomorrow, next Monday. Don't come tomorrow. It's next Monday at 9 a.m. Mountain Time to finish up this virtual workshop. So please come back. As I mentioned, the Crown Landscape Conservation Design is being co-convened by the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes of the Flathead Reservation, as well as the Crown Managers Partnership. I'm going to speed through these for a number of reasons, these slides in particular, because we talked about them last week and they're all recorded and we'll have all that information to you. So if you were here last week, you won't have to listen to this again. If you're just joining us for the first time, all of this information is available and will be available to you. Okay. Anyway, the Crown Managers Partnership, as you might imagine, find a lot of collaboration with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, all of our tribal partners across the crown of the continent, as well as elsewhere. The Crown of the Continent Landscape Conservation Design established a vision several years ago. This was a collaborative effort among our leadership team, and the vision is to ensure a resilient, connected landscape that supports healthy ecosystems and human communities, right? Both equally important. You sort of can't have one without the other, right? Healthy ecosystems and human communities. The landscape conservation design has some important tenets. They are inclusive, as you can see today. We're being as inclusive as we can, inviting knowledge holders of all kinds. Holistic in the sense that we try and understand and represent the entire ecosystem. Transparent in that all the information that we have and can share that's available to share is available to everyone for their review and assessment. And then it's iterative because we know new knowledge comes to us regularly, and new ways of knowing and new ways of applying that knowledge. And so iteration is an important hallmark of an LCD. The Crown of the Continent Landscape Conservation Design was essentially funded through this America's Ecosystem Restoration Initiative. This used to be the America the Beautiful Challenge Grant. You may be familiar with it. And the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribes were awarded $3.5 million with a number of partners that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. As I mentioned, the title of this proposal was biocultural restoration, and we mean that in a very, very authentic way in terms of using all kinds of ways of knowing, ensuring that traditional practices, traditional stewardship is part of the way that we proceed with this biocultural restoration, and focusing on important elements to the landscape like white bark pine and bison habitat, as well as wetlands. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. Most of this $3.5 million is going to restoration, but a small section was held aside for us to do additional collaborative planning on other elements of the Crown of the Continent landscape that needs our attention. The LCD goals, along with that vision, are to rely on cutting-edge science, indigenous knowledge, and modeling to collectively increase the resilience of the waters, forests, and grasslands of the Crown ecosystem, right? We want to sustain through partnerships. We very intentionally recognize the leadership, history, culture, and traditions, traditional territories of the indigenous peoples. That is all information that has been gleaned for millennia on how to best manage the resources in the Crown of the Continent landscape. And we bring these things together. We share our understandings of the values, concerns, opportunities, strategies, and ultimately, as you'll see today, we'll get to coordinated actions. Okay. Well, just briefly, what is this what's this thing called an LCD, or landscape conservation design, right? And you can read that. It's a partner-driven approach to achieve sustainable landscapes. It is very much intentionally to be bringing people together and bringing knowledges together, but it's also well defended in the literature. And as you see the map in the middle of the screen, there are a number of landscape conservation design projects going on across the United States, some as large as the grassland biome and some at a smaller scale. For example, the area that we're focusing on for this LCD, the Crown of the Continent. And you see the project area here. You're all very familiar with it. It's multinational, multicultural, and covers 18 million square kilometers in the north central Rocky Mountains. The reason we're doing a conservation design is because the Crown Managers Partnership have emphasized this as part of their conservation frameworks for the last 6 years. And going on continuing throughout the rest of this decade. I've skipped over a lot, and I've kind of, very easily glossed over some pretty complex themes. But if you see the link at the bottom of the screen, you can get all of the information about this landscape conservation design at this website. As we said, transparency is a hallmark, and we document and share everything we learn. Ultimately, the LCD, the Crown of the Continent LCD outcomes are looking for building strong relationships, right? Developing respect for many ways of knowing and communicating that in ways that are meaningful to the people that have to live and that have the opportunity to live in this beautiful landscape, right? People learn and know and collaborate in different ways. And then you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, there are different ways to communicate those things. Ultimately, those things are co-developed landscape scale conservation action strategies, right, that reference those millennia of indigenous stewardship and Western approaches that we find useful, like adaptive management. right? There'll also, and already are, knowledge-driven, data-supported maps of conservation opportunity. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And then ultimately, we'll develop this into an interactive website and dynamic communication tools. We're building a roadmap towards a resilient, connected landscape that supports healthy ecosystems and communities, right? As I mentioned, we've been working on this for quite a while. Many of you have been involved for a long time through this, so I'm not going to dwell on this here, but we've developed a list of features that we focus on. These are not priorities, as I've mentioned many times, right? But these are features that we all recognize that are important to this landscape, right? They are important things, they are important places, they're important kinds of relationships that we have with the wild things in this place. And one of the reasons we pick these particular features is because there's data on them. And these features can actually communicate back to us, the species, right? The habitats, they can tell us through the information that we have, whether they're healthy or not, right? So that's why we pick these. And then we've kind of, really kind of gone through a thoughtful process to develop maps and information that helps us be strategic in how we invest that time and treasure that's so dear to us, but is critical to the long-term sustainability of the Crown ecosystem. Today, we're going to focus on, right in the middle of your screen there, wetland, riparian, and aquatic systems. We're going to build the roadmap to a resilient, connected crown of the continent. That's a big, tall order, and we're not going to tackle all of this today. Folks that were with us last week know we kind of bit off a little bit of a chunk. We kind of completed one task that I'll show you in a minute here. Today's going to be an additional task, and we'll give you some guidance on that, right? Session 1, last week, we identified key attributes and health indicators. Today, we are going to identify promising conservation strategies and actions, and we have resources and tools for you to help us do that, right? Next week, we're going to take some of that information and develop a road for this roadmap, so that when we put all the roads together, we have the map that gets us to that resilient, sustainable future. Okay, so for the folks that were here last week, you're probably familiar with this. Folks who weren't, here's a quick rundown. Again, our focus was on riparian, aquatic, and wetlands. Our objective last week was to identify key attributes and health indicators. We had 23 participants. We had 4 breakout groups that all focused on different aspects. Excuse me. And the process that I'll talk to you about in a minute was to share knowledges and build on prior success, finding commonality. Okay, we identified key attributes and health indicators here. I'll direct your eyes to the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Imagine your body was something that was important to you. It is, right? Your body is the feature, right? And we always want to know, is your body healthy? Right. Well, the way that we're doing that for the LCD here is we're identifying these key attributes. So using that analogy of the body, one key attribute is your circulatory system. If it's working well, and your circulatory system is working well, we can be pretty sure that your body's on the healthy side. If it's not, we know there's something wrong. And the indicator for that is, a quick indicator for that is a blood pressure. So that's an analogy of how we started with knowledge during the shared listening sessions that Mike Derglow led. Excuse me. And we pulled attributes and indicators for management plans, and we used our knowledge, passion, and creativity like we're going to do today. This is a lengthy list of the key attributes and indicators that our groups identified last week as, as important attributes and indicators for these particular features. I'm not going to, we're not going to go through this list, but we captured all of it and summarized it here. And I want to show you on the bottom hand side of the screen how we're starting to see commonalities among these features, among these resources. And we start to figure out efficiencies in the way that we're going to manage these things. So the table at the bottom is the key attributes and indicators and where they overlap in terms of what we discovered last week. Okay, so what's next? What are we going to do next? We'll continue to engage all of you knowledge holders. We'll synthesize this information across the crown of the continent. Again, review more resource plans, as I mentioned, for evaluate the capacity and leadership availability there, and then integrate these conservation strategies to create the roadmap using all of our knowledges together. So today we're going to start that next step to complete the roadmap. We have a common understanding of these systems: riparian, aquatic, wetland. Right, we have maps of conservation opportunity that you'll see on the mural board. And again, we have this list of key attributes here. What we're about to do is to identify promising conservation strategies and actions that have the ability to have an impact across an area as large as the crown of the continent here. So that's going to be your challenge today, and we're all going to work together through these facilitated workshops, right? Again, your challenge is to identify one or two conservation actions working in your group that are very likely to lead to be successful if they're replicated or scaled up to the crown of the continent. The tools that you have available include the Zoom we're on right now, the mural board that we're going to move to in a minute, and you'll have these facilitated breakout rooms for you to work together to deliberate and debate, and the facilitators will guide you through to be successful. Okay, the bottom there, your knowledge, expertise, and creativity to find opportunity and consensus is what we're really going to strive for here. Okay, with that, are there any questions? Okay, I'll turn it over to Quinn here, and he'll give you a little bit more specific information. And we're going to have a lot of time today. I know a lot of folks were concerned about a lack of time, but we'll have more today to work on this stuff. That's kind of the reason why I'm walking through this so quick. Quinn, over to you.
Okay, Mike, you raised your hand.
I was on mute. I don't know at what point, Sean or Quinn, do we want to open up with a prayer or some word from Stephen?
Yeah, I'm very sorry, Mike, that I neglected that. I get all excited and run through that stuff. But please, let's pause now and let's turn it over to Mike and Stephen Small Salmon.
Stephen's down at my conference room, so Katie, can you help him, please? Thank you.
Which one should I do the prayer for the?
Stephen. Chciałeś, jak się podchwycić, to mi się choć chcę, choć kiedyś sam pójdę, jak są kościoły, jak szukam kamienicznym mieszkać, to chcę, jak są krzyki, to choć chcę, to choć kiedyś to choć ja, to już, ja, to chcę piesać. Small baby who was commission to say, come here, I made you stamped to say. Thank you.
Hand up, Stephen.
Lamb. Go ahead, Quinn.
Okay, thank you. Let me, Sean, if you'll stop sharing your screen.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Thanks for the kind words.
Okay, I will just share my screen. So I'm Quinn Shirtliff. I'm process facilitator here. Let me share. I'll just run through let you know where we're going today, and then I'll explain the exercise. So you should be able to see my screen. The agenda today is, as Sean already mentioned, the main objective is to work together in the different groups, including with Mike's group. You'll be doing something similar to figure out what would be good management actions that could be coordinated and scaled up across the area. We'll be working for about an hour together in that, and then we'll go on a break. And when we come back, each group will have an opportunity, at least the groups. I don't know if Mike's group will come back, but each of the groups, the breakout groups, will have a chance to share back what they came up with, and then to get feedback from the other groups and some and we can see what everybody's come up with, and that will give some ideas of maybe what how we need to adjust what we developed or what you developed in each group. And then we'll have a few more minutes, maybe like 15 minutes or so, to go back together into our breakout groups to apply and adjust what we came up with based on the feedback we received. And then there'll be a wrap up. So that's basically the day. In terms of, I just said, I shared this last week in terms of best practices for working in this kind of virtual environment. The only thing I would add here is when we have our share back area, we want tough love, meaning we want good feedback and critical, assessment of what the other teams came up with. That's the way we can progress and improve. So just wanted to share that. So what I'll do now is I'm going to put into the chat the mural board, which is what we worked on before. And Mike, do you want to pull off at this point? You can start working with your group.
One of the things that we were gonna do, I thought, was really just quickly share what each group overview of what you came up with, and I was gonna share what the elders came up with before we went into this, Quinn.
Okay.
Also, I didn't know, I thought we were gonna do introductions. Are we gonna do that still or no?
I think for the breakout groups, we'll have them introduce each other when they're in the group, but we
Okay, I'm gonna have these guys introduce themselves
Great.
before you do that, okay?
Great, perfect.
So if we could we'll start up here, then Katie and Gwen, you guys can go after us. So start with Levi. Wave your hand. There you go.
Levi, you want?
Bonnie Walker. Francine Dupuy. Rosalie Robertson.
Kyle Andrew.
Leonard Michelle.
Loretta Hoots.
And Kenneth and I. Go ahead. Katie or Gwen.
Sure. Jermaine White. Lucy Vanderberg.
Your owl. Oh, that's never mind. Go ahead. Sorry.
Need to hold the camera steady. Say your name. Eva. Say your name. Eva. Eva Boyd. Go back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
Say your name. Your name. Say your name. Oh, yeah. Mary Jane Charlotte.
Sam Boswell.
Clyde Trahan. Lynn Langford.
Stephen Smallson.
Lem Lunch. Thank you. So I'll just quickly go over what we came up with last week. Okay, is that all right? So Kenneth took some notes. I think I passed those out at the elders meeting down in Mission. If you guys have any additions, corrections, anything to add to those notes, or there was some concerns that we definitely don't want specific names of places or names of plants. So one of the things for last week we talked about was what makes those places healthy, what makes a wetland healthy, what makes a riparian area, what makes aquatic. So it's kind of talking about those areas where we walk along, and when our moccasins are getting kind of wet and damp, that might be a riparian area, like we're walking along the shore of Flathead Lake. So you know what the plants are that we gather, I mean, some of the service berries, some of the things like that. And then if your moccasins are getting wet, then you're in an aquatic area. So those places like any streams along the river, if you're in the water at all. The lakes, the rivers, the streams, those types of things. So I'm just gonna go through this really quickly. I highlighted a couple things that was on this paper that Kenneth put together. So I know that some of the elders said that some of the areas no longer have certain plants that were historically there to gather by themselves, by their families, grandparents and that type of thing. And that the impacts of that were cows. So when cows were introduced to the area, or they were allowed to enter some areas, then those plants were no longer present. We're not sure why, if their cows are eating them or if it's just from the overuse. There was some concerns about the bitterroot, and we talked about the roots are some of the roots are really small, and some of them are not. Well, I did say the plant. I did say the specific name. Some of them are small. Some of them are. There's not very many. I know that Joe Weaselhead and I did some when we were in college at SKC. We did a project looking at the impacts of a spraying. So when they spray those areas, even if it's like last year, where the spray is not supposed to last that long, the life, what is it called, the half-life or whatever. So it did impact those plants. Some of the plants in the primitive areas and the wilderness areas are healthier, probably because there's less impact, there's less human interaction or whatever. But some plants also need the human interaction so that they can be healthy. We talked about maybe taking into consideration assisted migration, where we might help a plant move higher in elevation or somewhere else. If they're not doing so good over here, do we help them by putting them over there in that area? Streams, springs and creeks are having less flow or no flow in them that historically had flow. Concerns about the approach taken by Western science communities in seeking input from indigenous people, where there is outreach and an expressed desire for indigenous perspectives. Engagement often comes with premeditated structures such as checklists and boxes, just like you're doing right now, Quinn. Which do not align with indigenous ways of communicating. Instead of open circular discussions, the process tends to be prescriptive, asking indigenous participants to conform to formats that are not reflective of our tradition. That's pretty much about it. And then what we'll do is once you guys break out into your groups, we're going to sign off, and Kenneth and I will be working with these guys, and Gwen and who else was there? Is Katie still in there? Maybe Gwen will be working with you guys down there. If you have any questions, Gwen, please call out. Also go ahead and if you guys have anything, I'll turn it over to you, Gwen.
Is there any questions that we have to the group?
Yeah, Mike?
Oh.
Yeah.
I think that people are working with the world, making a difference. Is the snowpack and the snow Like a long time ago, we used to, never have to worry about it, you know, every time winter comes, we get 20 below zero, a lot of snow. And, they're doing a lot of spraying. And, I believe to me, there's a creator, you know, that, like the stories, you know, the elders used to talk about coyote stories. And I believe in that still yet, you know. You start messing around with this world, you know, something is going to happen to it, you know. We're running out of water and getting dry and too many cows and too many people and too many cars. You just go, you know, you just go and go and go and go. And, you know, we're messing around with this world, you know. This world is made for people to live in, you know, to take care of. And we don't do that. Coyote said, on that one coyote story, he said, they made this world for the human beings to take care of, you know. But we don't take care of it, you know. We're just messy, you know. We do all these things, you know, like the rivers and the roads, and it's just, they make them different, you know. And the marks, like this highway here, I used to go way up in the mountains, and I like that straight road, you know. And I always liked that. And when I went up there, the road was, you know, all messed up. Well, it's a new road, but you know, it's things like that, and we're cutting all the trees and medicines, and Indian people believe in, still believe in the medicines and things up in the mountains that they talked about it last week, and it just goes on and on and on, you know. It's just, what do we do about it? You know, how could we do about it? Too many cars, too many jet planes. And it's just, I don't know. It's just, world's getting more warmer, you know, it's getting more warmer, and too many cattle, and we can't get enough stuff to feed anymore. It's too dry to even get wheat or whatever, you know, and potatoes and whatever, you know. We're just messing around with this world, you know. We shouldn't even be messing around with this world, you know. And it's that money, you know, I have to make money and all that. That's the way I see it, you know. And a long time ago, we never worried about anything. Here's the snowpack, we're getting all this, you know. Now it's just bringing all this stuff in and making money and stuff like that, you know. That's the way I believe in, you know. So I don't know.
What we're gonna do then is, Gwen will work with you guys down there in our office, and I'll work with these guys to come up with, part of that next stuff that you talked about, Sean. What are the impact? What are impacting? So I heard a couple elders talk about cows, kill the cows, eat more steaks, roast, burger. So, yeah.
All right, sounds good, Mike. Go ahead.
We're not gonna check back in afterwards. We'll just put our notes together and I'll send those out. So my apologies again. We never know what's gonna happen in the community. We had another funeral going on down in Mission, and it was a little bit of chaos this morning, trying to get people set up out there. And then, so last week we we did have services going on in both communities. So I had to move it to my office, where we came up. These are just some of the notes from that meeting, from that discussion. So we'll break off now, and we'll talk to you guys next Monday.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Stephen. It was, we really appreciate you sharing with us.
Okay.
All right.
Hello, Vega.
Take care. All right.
Thank you.
Good feedback from them. All right. So let me, let's see. Did I drop in the chat? I think I dropped in the chat oh no, I didn't. Let me share the mural board, and yeah, for our virtual, going forward, we'll hopefully be have in-person workshops when we do this. For now, we've got our boxes and arrows, which doesn't work as well in this virtual format for them. Okay, and I will share my screen and just orient you to what we're doing, and then we'll send you into your breakout groups to work. So I'll let you can explore around the board if you weren't here last week to see essentially this area. I'm looking at the shared screen now. This area up here is where we worked last week. You can look at that if you'd like, but for today's exercises, there is a board. I'm going to zoom back up. There is a board for each breakout group. There's a riparian board, and then over aquatics board, and then at the far end there's a wetlands board. They're all identical, and each will have a facilitator that can orient you. But what we're asking you to do is come in and spend about a few minutes just brainstorming and writing. You just click in one of these, or double click one of these yellow boxes, and we'd like you to identify up to 5 of the best actions that you've seen, the most effective actions for your feature. In this case, riparian features, if you're in this group. And we want you to think about these criteria here on the left. As you do that, what are the actions you've seen that are most effective in terms of restoring riparian areas or reducing the threats there? What are most feasible to do? What are most timely? So there may be actions that are really good ideas, but just in the political climate or for some other reason couldn't be enacted now. What are the actions? We hope many of these actions address threats that are acknowledged in these areas, and then what actions are scalable. Maybe some action worked really well in one area, but it couldn't be done in other areas for whatever reason. But what we're looking to do is build a toolbox that could be used in areas. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. There's a map in each one that shows, this comes from previous work done by the CMP, but there's essentially areas of them mapped out of areas of opportunity where, if based on overlaying different threats and the conditions of the habitat, what we want today is to identify some actions that could be replicated in those areas, and that we could develop this toolbox of the actions, best practices, how you implement those, best ways to implement it, and then a template of what the project would monitor to ensure that they're being effective and having an impact. So if you brainstorm up to 5 ideas that you have that kind of meet that criteria, and as you add an idea, just drag it down. We just have these different boxes to help you organize your thinking. If it's an idea that reduces, that affects one, invasive species as a threat, then just drag it under there. I'm going to go all the way over to the right. If it's something that is about restoration, it's not addressing a threat, but just restoring habitat, you could put it there. If it's something that mitigates climate effects, you could put it there. And so that's the main point, and then we'll have a discussion. Your facilitator will lead a discussion or help you decide what of these are really. We want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Are these good actions, and especially are they scalable? Which ones are the most scalable and that could be used in a toolbox setting across around the continent? There are some resources if you want to refer to them to the right in each panel. There's a really long list. These are, after looking at dozens of management plans, these are different actions that have been identified for this feature. You can take a look at that if that's helpful. This is just kind of a map, we call a situation model, that shows the different threats that I have in these pink boxes that have been shown to, to affect the feature of interest here, including if it's got a little H in it, that means it's been rated as a real critical threat. And this is based on expert input over the last few years for the CMP. I think that's it. Anything before we go into break, Sean or Maddie or anyone?
I'm ready to go.
Okay, so let's go ahead and go. Maddie, if you'll open up the breakout groups, and then if you have questions, your facilitators can take care of that. Hey, welcome back, everybody. I think we're all back here. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. And then when we come back, those who hopefully there was a person assigned to be the spokesperson for your group, you'll each be given about 5 minutes to just give the highlights, and I'll give you some more direction when we come back, but just the highlights of what your group came up with. So 10 minutes. Going on some feedback here. All right, to get us started for this, what we're looking for is we're looking for a progress report from each of the groups to see where you got to. I'm sure you didn't get done as much as you'd have liked, so this is just an update to the rest of the groups in the middle of their work. And to keep it's a progress report it's a report on your progress toward creating a short list of highly effectable and scalable actions. That's really what your team's working toward. And just a quick analogy, you think if, for those of you, maybe if you have a car that's busted, it's, we can take it to the mechanic. It'd be great if we had the knowledge, we could work on it ourselves if we had all the tools. You can buy thousands of dollars worth of tools that the mechanic shop has. But if somebody was just starting out, let's say you're a master mechanic, you say your car might have some problems. What's the first tool they should buy? Is it a little socket set? Is it a screwdriver set? What is the most important thing to have to start with? And maybe that's a bad analogy, I don't know. But the point is, everywhere there's wetlands or riparian areas, there's limited resources, right? And so your idea is to create this expert created short list of, if you need to do some work in your area on wetlands, let's say, what's the most effective, what's the most important tools you should start with, because you have limited resources. And that's what we want to hear of the progress you're making towards that. So I will share my screen, unless you'd rather share your screen, but I think maybe it'd be easier if I do it this way. I'll share my screen so you can look at the mural board, and you just tell me where to go and what to zoom in on, and we'll give you each 5 minutes as the presenter to tell about what you came up with. Don't read every box. We can do that on our own. Just give us the highlights. If you had some real breakthroughs in your discussion or some real challenges, those are interesting. We want to hear about that. And then each group should have, then we'll give about 10 minutes for others to chime in and provide some feedback or that kind of thing. All right. So, Noreen, you want to start us off? What group are you in again? You Aquatic?
Riparian.
You're Riparian.
Yep.
Okay. So I will share the screen for Riparian, and you just tell me where I need to go and you can just start talking.
Yeah, I think if you just kind of can show where yeah, that's probably good. Kind of people can see the kind of pink boxes a bit, and it's hard to read everything because it's too wide and too deep, obviously.
Mhm.
And I think that's the kind of one of the main messages is this space on the landscape. Riparian is small, but it has a lot of things going on that affect it. And I think that's one of the things that we recognize is that, I mean, pretty much all land uses are affecting it. And so our list just kept growing and getting bigger of impacts and actionable things that could be done to improve them. And ultimately, I think that's the thing we actually do need to acknowledge, and at the policy and planning and the on the ground level recognize that we are and have overused or misused these places, and it's both the land and the water. Obviously, water is critical for a riparian area to exist. Otherwise, if there's no hydrology creating riparian areas, they aren't riparian. And the other thing is, it's really about the behavior of people. And it really all comes down to a lot of it comes down to how do we influence that behavior of people. And and by no means is this the perfect way to frame it, because we talked about a few different ways, because we have large scale and sort of localized things that we can do. But one of the first things that we talked about was kind of how do we educate, how do we translate sound science into what actually is relevant and informs people, and makes it relevant to what users of all different kinds, whether it's grazing or recreation or industry, agriculture, energy sector, oil and gas, mining, forestry. How do we translate sound science? And how do we find, so that's kind of the first thing, is translating it, finding the opportunities so that that translation can get subject matter experts in front of these different communities of people. And those might be finding the champion or the champion sites that make the case or offer good examples. And so that those shared uses or different uses actually have a case to be made for them. And it might be economic, it might be value based in some other way, but all of those are why should we make change and how can we? So translating, finding those opportunities, those subject matter experts can work with champions, and part of that does have to be champions in front of policy and planners, so that we actually have the right structure at the state, provincial, or national levels, that we can have healthy riparian use because we've got good policy on land use, on water allocation or damming and diversions, so that there's actually opportunity for the good stuff to happen on the ground. And I think one of the things that we realize is that all of these things are already happening, or we've been all trying to do these things in some cases for decades, working on the issues that are in front of us. And so part of it is, I think, and I did this some thinking during the 10-minute break, which is not a long time. Like, how do we actually make progress? We already know these things need done. They should have been happening and are happening in varying ways. We need consistency, we need continuity, and we need resources, and that's dollars to support people both on the ground at the local community level, because that's going to create longevity in local communities, but also at the bigger level, that whether it's the policy or planning piece, having actually that consistency of resources and approaches that last. We all know that there's insufficient resources, or they change with the ebb and the flow of what's new and sexy in grants, or new governments. Priorities change, and yet we still have these issues in riparian areas, and that obviously affects aquatic and wetlands, which we'll hear about too. So that's not on our board, but I think that's one of the things that we need to make all these other things possible. We need continuity and consistency of resources and ability to keep working on things that's supported by the stuff I talked about. And feel free to jump in and change or edit my commentary if you wish, because that's kind of like a super high level perspective. How do we encourage stewardship? How do we encourage best practices? It's by having those kinds of pieces in place. So I hope I did it sort of justice for our group. And yeah, feel free to
Great.
ask questions.
Thanks, Noreen. Let's open it up to any clarifying questions or reactions to this? Anything that your group worked on that you say, hey, that's actually similar to what we came up with? Let's open it up. Any comments or questions for Riparian group?
It was so high level it didn't make any sense, or it was too generic.
Well, I have a comment, Noreen, which is what you mentioned there about, you know, consistency and continuity. Maybe that, you know, is that a strategy, an action that would be something unique of we need to develop across the crown of the continent, you know, some kind of consistent messaging that could be put out, or so that areas, you know, they don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. Is that the action that would be really impactful?
Yeah, I don't know that it's exactly that we're trying to create consistent messages, like let's say in education and outreach, because I think for the most part I think that's for those that are doing, say, education outreach, I think it's pretty, there's a lot of it out there. It's more, the consistency is more that it can keep happening, that it can be consistently applied, because new generations, new people arrive on the scene, people leave, people change age, change what they're doing in their lives, whether we're talking agriculture or recreation or industry of other kinds. So I think to me it's not so much that those of us delivering those kinds of messages, I think there's pretty, you know, it's okay to have variety because it needs to be relevant to your audience and your place and your community. But I think it's the consistency is more in repeatability or ongoing repeatedness than it is that you say the same thing that I say exactly. Although we obviously want them to complement one another.
Gotcha.
I think I don't know how you want that. Lynn and
Yeah, Lynn,
Kelly both
go
have their
ahead, Lynn,
hands up.
then Kelly.
So I actually wrote down those words, consistency and continuity, and resources. I love that you brought that up, Noreen. And I think this is actually what the LCD is trying to do with this playbook. So when we get to this next phase or this next workshop, this is the playbook. This is what we want to be able to hand down from I don't know if you want to call it generation to generation, but from managers to managers. As managers leave and come and go from their roles, we have this playbook, and we're going to try to, as a CMP, as working groups that we hope to come out of these workshops, you're going to be stewarding this playbook and say, hey, this is what we've written and agreed upon. This is what we talked about. We're going to continue to try to foster the things that we've written in this playbook, and we're going to try to be consistent with what we have, make changes when we need to. And we're also going to try to work together to find the funds to continue and to have this continuity of this work as a group. And this is what the CMP has been charged with doing for a very long time, and what we're trying to continue to do with this LCD. So I'm very glad that you framing it in this way.
Super. Thanks. Kelly.
I think that it's kind of both. We need to have a consistent set of first principles that relate back to the fact that if you kill the goose that's laying all the golden eggs in all these places, then you're lost. But the reality is we're so atomized as a society in all our little, user groups and interests and what we earn our income from and who we associate with and who we identify with and on and on and on. You almost need those first principles of first of all looking after the area, but you need a million different tailored messages to deal with the reality of life on both sides of the continental divide, life on both sides of provincial borders and an international border. So they have to start from consistent principles, I think, but then after that, boy, things get really detailed after that to individual audiences.
Yeah, and well, right after I said what I said about consistency and continuity, my next question to myself and to this group is, well, why isn't there already? Why isn't there already consistency? Why isn't there already continuity? I think it's because of what you said, Kelly. Not everybody actually agrees on the first principle. It would be very difficult for us to make the case that, it would be very difficult for us to make the case that an economy in North America is not succeeding, and therefore a community is not succeeding unless we're growing. That is the operating principle behind Western cultures. If we aren't growing, we're stagnating or we're in a recession, which is a bad thing. And that would assume that we have to keep expanding what we do. And that isn't generally consistent with, we can't do everything everywhere all the time. And, you know, actually recognize that the first principle is don't kill the golden goose. Well, we are killing the golden goose. We keep plucking feathers and eating little bites off of the leg. and and because we think we can, or we keep getting away with it, or at some point we think we, or, you know, so how do we, if the first principle is that these places are important and matter, like that's a pretty big shift in land use. And you know, we're picking on riparian. It could be, you know, it really, that's all natural ecosystems that are in challenges with human impacts and overuse and poor management. Yeah, not to be a downer. There's lots of great things happening, and I think we have a lot of opportunity, but we actually, at a societal level in our different jurisdictions, have to actually say sometimes we have to limit ourselves.
I agree with you, and I'll just do a little bit of response to that quickly. I agree with everything you said. I do think the first principle that these areas matter, that is the most important principle that even the people that are short-term economic thinkers would agree with, that they do matter. Now, some of them, it matters just from an economic lens. But if we start at that principle and work from there, I think we can start to reach some of these groups. So I'll just let the others talk now.
Great, thanks. We have about 3.5 minutes left for this group. Lynn, I think you were next. You're on mute if you're talking, unless your hand up. Sometimes my hand just raises for some reason on Zoom. Okay, Constanza, maybe we'll go to you. Well,
yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, Kelly, Noreen. However, I was just curious, what's one thing that's worked in the Flathead area is was based, a lot of the messaging was based on some polls that were made, and we found that water quality mattered most to everybody. So I wondered if a poll, at least on the, you know, if we're looking at messaging for aquatics, whether that is, you know, kind of the bullet that can be used to then sell certain actions, because I think focusing on actions, you know, like maybe even this whole electrification communications around EVs and whatnot, no matter how problematic it might be, you know, it is matching progress to the solution. And I hate that we need to do that, but I agree with you that perhaps we need to find ways to think of how do we match, you know, and then what you said, Kelly, regarding this areas matters, both bolstering whatever it is that we find is the commonality that can bring people together. How do you, you know, how do you create pride in those areas? Like people have pride in national parks, you know, it's all created. So how do we get to that? But I think water quality, we found it to be very effective. People who cared about farming and other things and wildlife, you know, when it came together to solve a problem or address a threat, you know, everybody suddenly started using the same messaging around water quality, and it worked, at least in some instances.
thank you, Constance. I think that's a great example of what can come out of this CMP work, right? Is these best practices, maybe not in every area, but some areas, water quality is important in some areas. Maybe that's something you should try in your area, that type of thing. We have about another minute and a half, if somebody has another comment.
Thank you, Constanza. I think you're right. Water quality is pretty common, although, again, not everybody cares about it, but I do think most people do. And it's important to a lot of different sectors and industries as well as individual people. So I think it goes back to what you said too, though. How did you find that out? Like, I think the social science piece is like, it's a strong case to be made of hearing from what people care about. What do they value? And then obviously trying to develop our actions to support those values that we can, you know, that in this case support healthy riparian areas, because we need to understand people and really if we took all the people, recognizing that mostly we're talking about recent human history that's causing a lot of the issues. If we weren't the ones causing issues, we wouldn't have to worry about us. So how do we understand people better? And I think, yeah, one of the Eastern Slope surveys we did with people, water quality was like same thing, top. Everybody thinks it's important, and things that are related to it, as a general rule. So
Thanks, Noreen. Thank you, Riparian Group. A little quite applause there for your work. Let's go ahead and go to the what's next on here? The Aquatics. Who's going to share from the Aquatics group?
I'm going to start at least, and I might get help for things that I missed. Okay, so we, similar to the Riparian group, we added outreach and education and coordination as a category of ways to reduce threats, because the people who are living on these landscapes need to be engaged, and they need to be informed and understand about ecosystem functions and importance to where they're living. And then we also highlighted conservation easements as tools to preserve natural, intact ecosystems. And then where they've already been degraded, we really focused on habitat restoration for floodplains and channels to enhance connectivity and function. We also talked about drought management planning, both in the context of hydropower facilities, but also in the watershed context. And hydropower facilities, I think they're required to have some type of contingency plan, but they may need help or bolstering with coordination and communications around these plans. And then we also talked a little bit about watershed drought management plans, and it was in the outreach and education part. And these would mainly consist of things that people can do proactively to lessen the impacts of future drought, as well as response actions to drought. And then the last thing I was going to talk about was just increasing or maintaining our measurement and monitoring of different water parameters. So things related to quality and quantity.
Okay, super. Other comments by the group and if not, let's open it up to thoughts, questions, or comments on this from anybody. Yeah, Noreen, go ahead.
could you just maybe expand a little bit more on kind of the damming, maybe the decision making related to the hydropower and the dams, right? That's probably just lumped because control water flow and volume and timing. Yeah, can you just talk a little bit more about how how the planning part might be possible to be changed, or could do, or needs to be?
Well, I think it depends on the owner of the facility, but I think most of the state and federal ones have to have, their operations plans clearly outlined for what they're doing with whatever water quantities that they have, and they're structured throughout the year. But what I'm not sure of is if they have enough coordination with the public and with outside entities and other agencies, just so that people understand what they're working with and what requirements they're working with, and also if there's things that people can do to support how things are operated, that they're engaged in that way. Did that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking, even kind of stepping back maybe a step. This is kind of assuming that the hydropower in the dam already exists,
Uh-huh.
but we've been seeing obviously a lot of pressure in the last few decades to remove them because of obviously the impact on riverine systems. And so I guess my kind of stepping back a couple steps is that, or did you guys talk about that as opposed to understanding the current status? Did you talk about the removal or maybe prevention of new ones, but also removal of ones because they do affect obviously the aquatic ecosystem?
Yeah, we did not talk about removal at all, but that's happened a couple of places. I know in Montana and other places in the US. I think, at least in the US, it's pretty unlikely that new projects would be developed. But yeah, that was one thing we didn't talk about. I don't know if other people have thoughts about that.
I'd be interested to know if there's a target list of hydropower areas that in the crown that we would want to concentrate on, and that would probably be what I'd be thinking about. If that's something we're talking about removal or starting to have conversations with folks, where would that be, and what are those target areas that we would be targeting those conversations?
Yeah, and the reason I bring it up in addition to the effect on waterways in general, in Alberta, there's a big push to put in some big new reservoirs in a variety of places, including the ones that will affect the crown. And certainly Stuart can maybe talk more to that and how we might prioritize, but he's got his hand up too.
That's really good to know. Thanks.
Okay, other comments on that, or we can move? Stuart has his hand up. Let's go ahead and go, Stuart.
Yeah, I can follow up a little bit. So thank you, Valerie. Very interesting and some overlapping concepts, both in your discussion and also in the templates that you got. If you think about it, stream flows, river flows, they're so critical, not only to the aquatic ecosystem, but also to the riparian and wetlands. And so this is, again, something that's going to cross the different themes. I took a quick look some time ago. I think there's 30 substantial dams in the crown of the continent, 2 monsters, which are Hungry Horse and Libby. While new dams are perhaps not currently being proposed in the States, there is a new dam proposed in Alberta on the Belly River, which is the last of the drainages of Glacier Waterton that's not dammed. And so the Kainai, the blood is concerned about that. And so related to that, I think it'd be appropriate. Our group talked about the prospect of recognizing what's left and perhaps prioritizing conservation of some of what's left. And in addition, of course, thinking about operation of the existing dams. And you'd mentioned in-stream flows or environmental flows, which is a theme in ours as well. So I do think that dams and diversions are so critical and quite substantial relative to the crown.
Thanks, Stuart. Comments or reactions to that? Yes, and I'm capturing. Go and correct my capturing there to make sure it's correct. Thank you. Okay. Other comments for the aquatics team here. Group, I guess. We're all a team. Yeah, Noreen.
Sorry, just because nobody else jumped in, kind of following up on what Stuart was just talking about. Did you guys talk about, and I realize you can only capture a small amount in the couple minutes you had, so just changing the dam management, not just so much for drought, but for aquatic and riverine health, so in-stream flow needs, ramping of flows, timing, and maybe on the drought side, maybe some of them are hydroelectric, but some of them are just are for irrigation purposes or the water isn't necessarily just a hydrologic or a hydroelectric piece, but is it possible to make other changes that would benefit the aquatic ecosystems through dam or flow management of the systems?
We didn't, but we should. We should add all of that. And that could be part of the planning because it might take a while to change regulations, but we got to start somewhere.
Stuart, go ahead.
Yeah, I could just follow up on that. There is a kind of a good news story related to Operation of Libby, which is again the monster that creates Koocanusa Reservoir. It was one of the Columbia River Treaty dams, and because of the endangered status of the Kootenai River white sturgeon, that required changes in operation, which were implemented over the last 3 decades, and started off with spawning flows for sturgeon that didn't really work too well. There's all kinds of problems for that fish, but subsequently they're implementing now called ecological flows, seeking to slightly mimic a slightly more natural regime. It's still primarily hydropower and flood control anyway, so Kootenai's a good news story.
That's awesome.
And another one, if I may share, is Hungry Horse Dam, just north of in Flathead County. Just there had also Fish and Wildlife Parks did some modeling a long time, 20 plus years ago, where they ended up regulating flows to impact also temperatures so that there weren't huge fluctuations. So I think, Noreen, to your comment, it would be really useful to have an assessment of where it is or isn't implemented that might require.
Any other thoughts you want to bring up here? If not, we'll move to the wetlands group.
Stuart, what was the phrase that you used? Was it ecological flows on the Kootenai? I was trying to capture that.
Yeah, so I mean the common phrase is environmental flows.
Okay.
It used to be called in-stream flow needs and then functional flows or whatever, but environmental flows is the common one. But ecological flows is the phrase that we've been using for Libby. I could try to provide a link to a paper that was published a year ago that described that 3-decade sequence leading to that phrase. And so again, it started off with fish flows or spawning flows and then transitioned to ecological flows. But more broadly, these would be referred to as environmental flows. And so it's a partial mimicry of the natural flow regime, as is possible within the context of the system. So,
Stuart, if you find that link, you can just come into this place in here if you can find it and just paste, Control V, and it'll paste the link. It'll be linkable right here in the mural or put it in the chat and I could drop it in if that's
Quinn, I'll email it or text it to you, and maybe you can tuck it in the intervening sequence.
Okay.
And that'll be a link. It's an interesting paper. I hope people will find it interesting.
All right, should we move to the wetlands group? All right, thanks. Appreciate that. Yes, applause for that. Appreciate the report back. And who's up on the wetlands group?
Dawn.
Done. All right. You guys get the award for having the most colorful board. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So where should we start? So let's look at, we decided we need to get some baseline information really to know what it is we have in terms of wetlands. So we have wetland monitoring, and not just monitoring for monitoring's sake, but to determine specific issues that pose the different threats to our wetlands. So species diversity, soil type monitoring, depending on what you're trying to manage for, but and then ultimately come up, as was mentioned earlier, creating a standardized database for monitoring across the crown of the continent ecosystem. So a lot of us know we have wetlands. The state of Montana has a great database for us to know that we have wetlands, but what is actually happening in the wetlands in terms of species diversity, et cetera. So that was one of our important ones. The second one was appropriate restoration. Very specific to the site, depending on what you're managing for and what the threat is actually to the wetlands. So we decided appropriate restoration was a way to go. depending on what you're trying to do. So utilizing beaver-related restoration designs is very appropriate in certain habitats, and other areas maybe not, but really focusing on trying to maintain those characteristics of a wetland and keeping that species diversity is very important. And then, of course, the culturally important species as well. And then another one that the green ones are the ones that we decided were the most important for the threat of grazing, is basically installing fencing, basically to protect our wetland vegetation, but from grazing, but also just acknowledging the different impacts that come from trespass. Well, not necessarily trespass livestock. For us, it's trespass, but from livestock and wildlife, for that matter, from grazing, but also the pollution and eutrophication that comes along with that to the water systems, as well as invasive species, soil compaction, etc. So acknowledging that installing fencing to protect some of these wetlands will be a good way to reduce the threat. So those were the three main ones. We struggled. We talked quite a bit with the buffering about regulations, and we know that there's some regulations, but it's not consistent across the board. Just was mentioned, I think, with the Riparian group, it's really tough to have consistency across different agencies, different countries, things like that, but trying to increase awareness, which was brought up again, but that we kind of realize that's important because we need to want to minimize the amount of disturbance and especially new development and looking at compliance issues, but it's really tough. So that's one that we acknowledge was important, but we just kind of struggled in terms of how to actually do that across the crown of the continent. Did I forget anything important?
No, I don't think so.
Hey, Constanza?
Yeah, just wanted to raise the issue of fencing. And I realized that, grazing and impacts can come from wildlife. However, we try to focus on wildlife-friendly fencing within temporary, which might be 7 to 10 years. Fencing to give plants time to grow before the wildlife impact it. However, I would emphasize wildlife friendly so that we don't impact the corridors and critical areas.
Yep, definitely. And we're doing why this came up particularly for us is doing wildlife friendly fencing, which we already do for domestic livestock, but also then when we think about protecting our wetlands from potential impacts from bison. So we're looking at that, and definitely will be wildlife fencing. Wildlife friendly fencing, except for bison.
So, Costanza, I also, one thing to think about is leveraging technology. More and more working with private landowners and some of the virtual fencing, like the possibilities both on public and then or private and public land like Forest Service land could be really, really good ways to manage grazing better in our systems to lessen the impact, not necessarily remove it totally, but to lessen the impact so that they're in their shorter periods of time and we're using them to help us with some of these systems.
Thanks, Steve. Stuart?
Thank you, Don. And I might note that we better up our game a bit. You guys did such a great job with the colors and links and everything. It's awesome that you did it so quickly. I'm noting that all three of these have a lot of overlapping concepts. And of course, the three different systems are not discrete, but are connected, riparian, aquatic, and wetlands. And so it's not surprising that aspects such, for example, livestock impacts are broadly applicable across these. So I quite interested and encouraged to see this range of overlaps, and it'll be nice to kind of coordinate some of those as we think about these. And of course, one might imagine that appropriate applications or conservation or restoration responses would ideally be aiming for more than one of these ecosystem functions.
Yeah, exactly.
Mary.
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Stuart said, and I would also go so far as to say the impacts might differ. When I think about some of the peatlands, we have some up by the BC border that have different species. We have several species of simians and other things where cattle graze, and we're hoping to use virtual fencing. Why they're up there, who knows? But those impacts, interestingly, and maybe more lasting than those within the riparian zone, based on kind of like Stuart, what we were seeing in our breakout week. They're very much disturbance dependent, and so movement of water and sediment across that floodplain, that unconsolidated alluvium, can sometimes erase, maybe not, but what we've seen is with the hugging and creation of unnatural flow patterns, sort of, you're squeezing the sponge. The sponge is being squeezed out, and so the sponge is a pipe, So I do think it'll be good as we drill down to, acknowledge that they're impacting the system, but perhaps in different ways, and then the metrics that we use to sort of take temperature and quantify these impacts needs to be clarified. That's all I'm saying, just so that you else.
Thanks, Mary. I have a question for the group under this appropriate restoration, and maybe you haven't got this far because you had limited time, but is your thought that maybe you could assemble kind of these best practices for a variety of appropriate restoration activies, that could be a way of scaling this out? Here's how you might do it if you want to do beaver related restoration, or have you any thought? Is that kind of the direction you're going with this?
Yeah, I think that's what we were talking about, especially after you bopped into us and wanted us more specifics. It really depends on what you're managing for as well, your wetland for as well as your landscape. So yeah, I think developing how to, if you want to do this, with beaver ponds and trying to manage that way, or if you're using native plant restoration, if you're going to go into willows and cottonwoods, and then if you have different type of grass or forb species that you want to be focusing on. So yeah, ideally it would be if this has been working for you, that we kind of come up with a template on how that can be applicable across the crown.
Great. Sean, then.
Can I add to that really quick? I think it's also that we're recognizing that we're restoring the proper system for the place. Because people want to do restorations, but they're adding components that probably shouldn't be in that context to begin with. And so that's also sort of is that cautionary note. It's that toolbox to help them do it, but also understanding, and that comes in a lot with the monitoring playing into it, what should actually be there on the ground that we should be restoring.
Thanks, Steve. Sean, Finn, did you?
Yeah, I'll just quickly finish up. So Steve and Dawn and others, thank you very much. I just wanted to make the point that there's a lot of pieces and parts to this LCD, and so we haven't really sort of talked about them all, especially very specifically. But one of the things that we've done over the last couple of years is develop these threat-specific spatial databases, right? This involves both the kind of concept that Dawn brought up about sharing data, but also identifying, at a place-based where the threats, are the most intense or the most severe, or they should be addressed, right? We're putting together those data sets as part of this LCD. So hopefully people are really starting to, your mouth is watering a little bit about the fact that multiple tools can come together like this. But I also want to mention that, which we haven't already, because there's so many pieces and parts, that a chunk of money for this grant, this America the Beautiful Challenge grant. I'm just going to keep calling it that. Went to the Montana Natural Heritage Program to develop spatially explicit invasive species data for the entire crown. So if we're talking about, that's the kind of data set that becomes really powerful when you start talking about, well, what's going on at the place-based level or at the local level, right? What are the invasive species that we have here or your neighbors have, right? And so we're putting that data together, putting it into the hands of groups like all of us here, that then really kind of be able to break out these kind of best management approaches. So, thank you.
I suggest we go ahead and go back to our call this good. Again, thank you for the wetlands group. You've got about 10 minutes I'd say we go back to our breakout groups, and any last discussions for the day of what you heard and anything you want to incorporate, put notes like we've been doing, some sticky notes to capture ideas. And then we'll come back together just to kind of wrap up. All right. And yeah, so that's the main idea. And also, I'll just point you all to it. We're up in each of your boards, there's a little group of orange boxes. Ultimately, we're hoping that we're trying to create standing working groups for each of these. And if you're willing to continue, whether whatever you can give, whether it's just being an advisor, whether it's participating in things like this, at any level, if you'd like to continue as part of a crown level working group, and you could put your name in different groups if you wanted, please add your names to that before you go there, and because this is great to be together once or twice or three times, but the real benefit's going to be if we've got a group of experts that can help develop products over time. All right, Maddie, can you open up our breakout rooms again?
Yep. Ready? And goodbye.
Thank you. All right, we are ready to wrap this thing up. Good work, you guys, today. I just dropped, in the spirit of adaptive management, I dropped another link into this little board that's below where you've been working. We appreciate any feedback. I don't know if you guys understand. We're doing this with riparian, aquatics, and wetlands groups right now, but we're going across the crown of the continent over the next many months, kind of duplicating this kind of thing. So any feedback you have of what's working and what's not to get the information we need and to create these working groups or these expert panels, we would appreciate it. All right, so for wrap up, I guess, so next week, I think I just explained this in one of the group. The main objective next week is to come together, select a couple of the high leverage actions that you identified, and create a roadmap, what we're calling a roadmap for monitoring and impact. And what that is we're going to just detail out what are the assumptions that are being made. When we say, hey, we want to do whatever the beaver action was, what are the assumptions about if manager were to implement that in their jurisdiction, what results would need to happen in order to achieve the outcomes that they want, to reduce the threat or to improve that wetland. And we're going to think through what those are, and then create throughout that little chain, we're going to create little points of this is where you ought to monitor it to make sure that your assumptions are correct, that you're actually making progress. And here's what you would monitor to know if you're achieving an impact. We want to create these templates so that a manager that's just getting into it, all right, we're going to do this, and they aren't thinking through maybe some of the potential negative side effects that could happen, or that they haven't thought through all those assumptions perhaps as much as a group of experts thinking through it could. And so it will be a help, and it will set up their monitoring plan so they can implement that action and know what the checkpoints are along where they need to collect data to ensure that they're doing what they said they were doing and achieving an impact. That's what and of course, ultimately over time, we'd like to have a whole series. This is part of that playbook or toolbox, a whole series of these developed. But next week, we'll just start. Each of you might only have time to do one. We'll see one or two in your breakout groups. Let's see. Sean, anything else before we let people go?
Quinn, maybe quick rundown from each group about what they plan to address, because I know our group was kind of making sure we weren't overlapping. So did other groups choose sort of their candidate strategy?
Yes, wetlands did.
What is it, Phil?
Appropriate restoration of wetland monitoring.
Okay. Aquatic?
For some reason I can't get back to the mural. It's gone. Oh, here we go.
I got you, Lynn.
Okay, go ahead.
Aquatics is going to be focusing on land use, specifically like purchasing easements and how it relates to other factors.
Okay. So I think Riparian, we're waffling back and forth between hydrological management and people, essentially sort of education and outreach.
Super. Okay.
We got a half a minute here. Anybody from Riparian want to bring us home?
Jumping in from Aquatic, Sean, since you bring up the people, our group talked about how people awareness, that education outreach piece really is an underlying facet of all of these other factors. So if that helps your group at all, that's one way we were thinking about it.
Okay, maybe that's something we can bite off, Stuart or Kelly.
Sean, I might favor people for this week. Just as we were going with hydrologic management, I think that maybe needs a little bit more thinking and a bit more discussion and dialogue with the other two groups.
Fair enough. Achievability or feasibility was one of the criteria.
Yeah.
Mary, Noreen, Kelly?
I just say that, yeah, and Noreen expressed it in our breakout group, is that we kind of know what the things are, that the issue seems to be the people. So I'll chime in with Stuart on that.
Me too. Ditto.
Okay, we're good. Thanks, everyone.
Kind of a request.
Thank you.
It's just,
Okay,
you
we're a
know,
minute over. I guess I'll close this out by thanking everyone. This analysis team, the facilitators, will get back with our Native American partners who are meeting in person. We'll have some summary material and some guidance ready for next week. Please come next Monday so we can wrap this all up. Invite your friends. I know you have many of them. And let's make this a community-based participatory thing. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.